You're listening to the Morphology Podcast. Thanks for tuning into the Morphology Podcast, aka Murph here to share interviews about biking experiences from cyclists who have pedaled to places all over. Each week, we'll get to know new people and explore new destinations to ride your bike. As you listen to these adventures, you may wonder, why haven't I done that yet? Well, Experience Plus is a premium bicycle tour company with a great past. Back in the late 60s, a foreign exchange student from Italy met a high schooler in Oregon. They parted ways but reunited, fell in love, and married. They chose to live in the U.S. but wanted to travel. To make ends meet, they put up posters to get people to join them on a bike tour to Italy, and it was a huge success. Throughout the years, they continued doing tours and eventually decided to make a business of it. Today, Experience Plus is owned and operated by the couple's daughters, including today's guest, Maria Elena. They offer over 100 premium tours in places like Europe and South America, including the classic guided tours, bike and boat tours, and gravel explorations. Maria Elena is on to tell us all about Experience Plus. A very warm welcome to Maria Elena. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks.
Good. It's awesome to have you on. So I said this in the intro, but Maria Elena is part of the Experience Plus bicycle tour company. And I've spent more of the time that I probably should admit on your website, like daydreaming, wanting to go on a tour. So I'm really happy to have you on and talk about your company.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to be here.
You
excited
bet.
to talk about how all that dreaming happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, taking all those daydreams into reality, right? Well, before we get into your company, will you tell the listeners where you currently live and, if there's a cycling culture or what it's like there?
Sure. I live in beautiful Fort Collins, Colorado on the Front Range here. And we have a pretty strong cycling culture, I would say. We have been designated by the League of American Bicyclists a number of, I think platinum bicycle friendly community a number of times. And so, yeah, we have a lot of people who love to bike. We have great trails, great roads, great gravel roads out our back door. So yeah, I'm really lucky to live here in Colorado. Mm-hmm. Although I will sheepishly say that I don't bike as much as I should here. Life just seems to get in the way.
Well, if you actually get to go on any of your tours, you probably are busy enough biking elsewhere.
That's part of it. Yeah. I think the other part is that actually most of the time I'm sitting behind a desk, unfortunately, when it comes to planning and helping other people dream about cycling. I think it's just more the time of day and the moment in my life these days. But I do love that I live in a place where there is so much enthusiasm for cycling.
Sure. And that's a perfect segue into talking about your past, because you and your family have made bicycle travel like part of your life, at least from what I look at on your website. So will you kind of give us the, kind of the inside scoop on growing up with your family and bicycle travels and all that good stuff?
Absolutely. So the story started with my parents, actually. My mother is Italian and my father is from Oregon. And my mom was an Italian exchange student in high school, believe it or not. And so they met back when they were young folks in high school. And my mom went back to Italy. I don't know if she thought much about this guy she met in Oregon in the 60s, in the late 60s, mid 60s. And my dad just kept finding ways to travel abroad to basically reconnect with her, is the short story. There's a longer version a little bit somewhere on our website probably. And so he also fell in love with Italy in his pursuit of her. And she was finishing her college degree in the University of Pisa. And after she graduated, they bicycled from Pisa to her hometown, which was up and over the Apennines. And that was back in, 1967 or so, 1969 or so. And long story short, they got married, ended up back in the U.S. But, there was this draw to get back to Italy. And they thought in 1972 they were trying to decide how are we going to pay to get us back to Italy. And so they decided to advertise a 10-day biking trip from Pisa to Forlì, which is her hometown. And it was $275 or $295. And it was camping. And they got 24 people to sign up on 3 or 4 different departures by just
Wow.
putting posters on college campuses up and down the Pacific Coast.
I was just going to say, how do you advertise in 1972 about a tour? It's like there was no
Posters
internet.
on college campuses, apparently. And so that's the origin story of how they thought about getting some people over to Italy to bike across Italy. And it's they got those folks over, and they had a couple of trips. The stories from them are pretty impressive. They're anywhere from, by the 3rd trip, they all got bored, so they thought about new places to go.
Wow.
And, or the ladies who met some interesting young men in Florence and decided not to join the trip. There's lots of different variations on those, what happened there, I think. But yeah, that was kind of the nugget. And they were actually both going to school and enjoying, doing their studies, finishing up. In the end, they ended up getting their doctorates. And a lot of that was because even though they had started with cycling, they then actually didn't continue for a while they finished their studies. They ended up doing more trips with students and leading other trips during their master's and PhD programs across Europe, across Russia. They did a lot of student trips. So travel and kind of cultural immigration was always, immersion was always part of their really their goal in getting out and sharing the world with people. And so then we get to 1985. So there was a little bit of a gap there, and they'd had a family, and now they had to move 4 people over to Italy. So they actually came up with a number of ideas. They thought, okay, maybe we'll do cultural tours and food tours and history tours and hiking tours and biking tours. And they re-advertised all those. And the ones that caught the most attention was the biking tour again.
Oh, wow.
And so that was how it then started.
Were you around by this time?
I was around by then. I was 3 or 4, or 2 actually. And so that began our annual pilgrimage to Europe every single summer while they ran trips, and I got to hang out with my grandma on the beach, which wasn't so bad for those first 10 or 12 years. But basically then I did grow up in a family company. My father ended up starting full-time not too long after that and running Experience Plus. We changed our name from Bike Across Italy or Italian Specialty Tours and Bike Across Italy to Experience Plus as we expanded into more countries and more itineraries. And then by the mid-90s, we were in 5 or 6 or 7 different countries and growing. So, and I grew up, our family vacations in the summer were either camping and looking for new routes or biking and looking for new routes. I have a memorable memory of biking in Norway. It was one of our first scouting trips where my dad was like, oh yeah, no, we'll just pick up bikes at the train station in Lillehammer and go north. Or no, we ended up going further north first with the train, but we did pick up bikes, I think, at the train station. And they were these older, clunky steel frame kind of city bikes. And we ended up on gravel roads for miles. And I was 12.
Oh my gosh.
Loaded.
And what is, I was going to say,
loaded.
What did those bikes look like? So let's just say, you use that as your example. You're 12 years old, you're on these clunky bikes. Do you have panniers? Are you hauling all your stuff?
Yeah, we had panniers. They had racks for sure.
And did your
dad? I can take a photo actually. They all had racks. Yeah, wow. I think we all were carrying our own luggage. We weren't camping in that one. We were on the hotels because by then we were doing, we've always done all of our accommodations since after 1972. We've been staying in hotels on all of our trips. And so yeah, we have some great photos, family photos and memories of those trips. And we did the same thing in a number of other places as we scouted trips in my teenage years. So that was, and then I grew up guiding. I started becoming a tour leader at 15. I was on a trip with a bunch of other 14-year-olds from Denver. Actually, that was really fun. And helping them bike from Venice to Florence. It was great when I couldn't drive in Europe because then I could bike every day. I didn't have to be one of the drivers.
Yeah, sure.
But then I turned 18 and I had to start taking my turn driving the van.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Well, I want to hear more as far as Experience Plus, you mentioned Italy, but then you've expanded beyond that. Like, does that, the very first trip that your parents did, I think before they were married, but does that trip still
Mhm.
exist?
It's a different version, but it
Yeah,
does. It was
yeah.
that was the Pisa to Forlì, and then it became Pisa to Venice and Venice to Pisa, and that is still our hallmark bike across Italy trip. And it goes from generally now it only goes Venice to Pisa. We found that's the preferred direction just due to the terrain and the logistics of the ride.
Yeah.
But it is still one of our most popular trips. We've also got a shorter version that is just Venice to Florence. So a lot of our trips are kind of a short 7 or 8 day option, and then many have an extension, what we call the plus departure. So Venice to Florence is this 8 day trip, and then Venice to Pisa is our version of that longer or 12 day tour if you do
Oh,
the full trip. And it's
yeah.
designed so that you literally can pedal from Venice all the way to Pisa. You never have to get in a vehicle. That's how we try and design most of our trips, if possible, in all of our routes and itineraries.
And then do you still kind of keep with the family tradition of hotels every night, or do you still offer
Yes,
camping?
no, we don't do any camping anymore. We're all in hotels. Most of our tours now are kind of that mid-level premium level, as most guided tours have gone in our world. And so we are staying in really nice 3 and 4 star hotels on most of our tours uh, throughout Europe and South America.
Yeah, I still have an entire closet full of camping gear, but as I get older, the thought of sleeping on the ground is just not as interesting of an option as getting a hotel room.
Yeah, so a good night's sleep is always nice and helpful to regenerate you for the next day, for sure.
Exactly, yeah. Well, tell us a little bit more about Experience Plus bicycle tours, like maybe where you go, maybe start out with what the website is so that, if people are listening, they can either follow along or
Sure,
write
you
it
can
down.
certainly browse. You can we try and we've had a website for too long in that there's so much information on there. Every
Yeah.
year we actually taking information off of it because we're probably have too much. But yeah, the website is simply experienceplus.com. And yeah, we travel now in about 15 or 18 different countries. I actually don't
Ah.
know the total number. It depends because some of our trips, we go through Switzerland. So do we have a tour in Switzerland? But none of our trips start in Switzerland. They just go through it. It's
Oh,
always hard
okay.
to determine how you gauge that. But we're in most of Central and Southern and Western Europe, and including in Scandinavia now. We have a new trip that we relaunched this year from Copenhagen to Oslo. It's a 2 week trip.
Mm.
And we also are in Chile and Argentina and in Cuba. And we have a number of different types of trips, and that's what we're trying to do to kind of make tours fit for the right person. So we have our classic tours, which is, of course, based out of our original concept of a bike tour, which is the idea that, hopefully we can ride from point A to point B the whole way. I would say
Hmm.
90% of our trips, you don't ever have to get into a van if you want to. We do have van support for those who want to take a lift or shorten the day. And then we also mark the route with a unique system of chalk arrows on our classic trips.
Mm.
And chalk arrows are, you can call it the original GPS. I mean, if you ever do like a community ride or things like that, sometimes you see signs or other people put these colored arrows on the ground. Well, we just use regular chalk. It's actually drywall. Secret tip for everybody
Oh.
is just drywall in a water bottle, and because you can make them really big and then you can write things, and it's really just dust at that point that gets
Sure.
washed away really fast, and it's not polluting, it's not chemical or anything. And so that has, since 1985 or 86 when my father started it, we've been chalking routes throughout Europe, and it provides this worry-free way of navigating where you
Hmm.
don't have to have a device in front of you. I mean, for 25 years there weren't devices to use
Right.
until just the last 10 years, and it still works great. People love it, and it really lets people ride at their own pace because we believe strongly the bike is your own vehicle. You don't have
Hmm.
to feel, we're not there for racing. We're not there necessarily to require people to go a certain speed, and we really encourage people to stop if they want, stop at all of the local shops and have as many coffees and cappuccinos as you want, or gelati depending on where you are, or croissants if you're in France, and or stop and take that photo. If you're on a group ride, you sometimes may not feel like you can stop and take that photo you might want to
Yeah.
take, or chat with the farmer or whatever it is that inspires you. And we really want people to feel like they can kind of own their own day. And that's how we design our trips, for that reason, to try and make the navigation as easy as possible. So that's our classic tours, and the majority of our trips fall in that category. But we have a couple of different styles. We have bike and boat tours as well. The main difference there is that you're on a boat for a number of nights, so you don't have to pack every day. We still use our chalk arrows. And then we have expeditions, and those started in 2006 with when my sister and I actually took ownership of the company in 2008. And that's when my parents retired from that work. My mother actually had always had a separate life as a professor. She was a professor at Colorado State University for 30 years.
Oh, wow.
In French and Italian language, literature, and various things, women's studies. So my dad, who's a geographer, he was dreaming about cross-continental bike rides, and he was staring at the map of Europe, and he thought about a trip from St. Petersburg to Istanbul. And then he thought about how we normally develop trips, and that means going out and scouting every mile. And he's like, that's going to take a long time to scout.
Right.
And it's going to just not be cost effective if we then have to recover that. And so he thought of this idea of maybe there's a group of people out there who understand that we have great ways to plan, and we can use local tour leaders and local cyclists to help us, but we don't have to pedal every mile before we take a group on it. And that became the beginning of our expedition trips. And so we've run expedition trips now once or twice a year, all kinds of big cross-continental tours. The first one being St. Petersburg to Istanbul. We ran that one 3 or almost 4 times, I think, with it was 45 days. And then we've done across the Andes a number of times, down from Chile to Argentina and Argentina to Chile. Most of the time we were going Chile to Argentina because the prevailing winds are in your favor if you go in that direction.
Right.
And we've done some really beautiful, wonderful trips across Europe, also from the North Sea to the Black Sea. And just kind of those iconic points that you stare at a map, you think, I wonder what it would be like to bike from point A, that point to that point. And we've managed to keep those. We try to keep them at, they're still supported and they're still in hotels, but not as expensive per night as our classic tours, because that gets to be pricey if you're going on 20 or 30 night tours. And so that's our expedition tours. And then we also have our gravel explorer tours, and those are new, and we're trying to actually keep those to 7 or 8 days. And also from a budget perspective, we actually have included less meals together, and we've taken a few things off, mostly because those are the things that, as much as we love them for cultural immersion and introductions, we don't want them to make the price so inaccessible.
Oh, sure.
And so we also stay in more 3-star hotels, because some of the locations we're going to also are a little bit more suited to that. So we just launched those about 2 years ago. Actually, the first year was supposed to be COVID. That didn't work out so well. So we actually have been developing those gravel explorer tours, and the goal being that we are more than 50% of the time off pavement on those rides. And it's been really fun to develop those. And we're in 3 different countries. We're in Italy, Croatia, and Portugal with those trips right now.
So when you talk about like a gravel adventure, for example, does the tour include an actual tour guide who knows the route and is going to keep you on task to help you?
They provide the support. Yeah, they provide the support and kind of the briefing on what the day is. Yes. So all of these ones that I mentioned are actually guided tours. Okay. And on our classic and bike and boat expedition and gravel trips, we have 2 or 3 of our tour leaders, and they're always local or have lived in the country for as so many years and definitely speak the language. And then we have actually recently relaunched a self-guided tour through in Italy. So my sister and I actually own 2 companies. We have a company in Italy as well, and that's the company that actually operates all of our trips for us. It's a legal tour operator in Europe and based in Italy. And that company has been running self-guided tours. So those tours don't have a guide. And they're also much more flexible in terms of timing, because you can more or less pick your own date. We have recommended start days for certain trips just due to logistics and planning purposes. But the nice thing is there, yeah, you can just say, I want to go on this week, and we will confirm availability of the hotels, and then we book the hotels and give you routes and a bike, but you're on your own. So from a budget perspective, it's much more accessible, and it's a great way to have a bike adventure in a new country, because you have the logistics figured out.
Yeah, I was going to say that's sometimes the hardest part. Looking at a map is way different than when you're actually on your bike traveling on those roads. So you guys have all done all the hard work ahead of time.
Yeah, and then for those cases, of course, we're navigating with GPS tracks that we provide.
Mm-hmm. Will you explain a little bit more about what bike and boat means?
Yeah, so there's a lot of barges and boats in France, and in the Netherlands. There's these canals that have they used to be shipping barges, actually, that have been converted into movable hotels.
Oh.
And so you can, they're basically have rooms, and you stay on the boat overnight, but then every day you disembark and you bike 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 kilometers, 30, 40 miles, and then you meet the boat in another place. And what's really nice is you don't have to pack and unpack.
Right.
And it's a great way to travel. And we have trips in France, in the Netherlands, and in Bruges to Amsterdam, actually, is our itinerary for 2025. And then we also have bike and boat tours in Croatia, and that's actually on a motor sailboat that's got 8 cabins. So there you're in the Adriatic on the islands experience. And then we also have one in Greece, in the Dodecanese Islands.
So all of these tours sound like dream come trues. Like they are beautiful places. You've already done the hard work as far as logistics go. Will you explain, like maybe pick maybe a super popular one, and like what all is involved in the tour? Like, do I stay in a hotel, get up in the morning? Like, give us like maybe what a normal day is like.
Yeah, no, definitely. So a normal day, maybe I'll pick our Venice to Pisa because it's our origin. It's the OG,
yeah, the OG.
of tours. And it's a little different because we're, of course, in Venice. We're actually on an island off in the Venetian lagoon where you can have bicycles, because in proper Venice you don't have any bicycles. But yeah, we organize basically from when we say day one, we'll meet at this hotel at X time. Usually it's right after lunch, because if people are flying in the morning, which is generally, the arrival time in Europe or even in South America, then you have time to get to the hotel. Or many people maybe arrive a day or two before to get over jet lag. We'll actually help on some of our itineraries. We can help book the pre-night hotel if you're wanting to arrive a few nights before. To settle in. And then we'll meet you. We have our bike fitting on a self-guided tour. We just have our bike deliverers do the bike fitting as well. And on a self-guided tour, they'll do an entire briefing of the entire trip in that orientation talk, because that's the only time you meet one of our staff is when we drop off your bike and do the bike fitting and briefing for self-guided trips.
Right.
But on our Venice to Pisa, for example, you meet your tour leaders. We do our bike fitting. We try and make sure, if people have their own saddles they love, we recommend they bring them, or of course pedals. We'll put pedals on, make sure the bike fits, do a little test ride. And then we have an orientation and safety talk that same afternoon. And then the next day, we probably already start off pedaling, and we have a time. We'll have dinner together. Most of our trips have anywhere from just a few for the Explorer tours, the gravel Explorer tours. We have maybe 2 or 3 nights together out of the 4 or 5 nights, or out of the 6 nights, versus our other guided tours where we tend to have almost 2/3 of the dinners included in the price.
Okay.
And that's just because we find people like that camaraderie. They like to not have to pick. And then we do set menus so that we can really showcase the local food. We can also manage dietary preferences that way. So if somebody's celiac or vegetarian or vegan, that actually set menus actually make it somewhat easier for us to manage that. So yeah, the first night we do a nice intro dinner, and then the next day we have a time that you want to bring your luggage down. Our tour leaders are around at breakfast to help people get going. And we have an arrows downtime for the marked rides. And for when you're leaving with your GPSs, we just recommend a time to depart. And then generally people leave around the same time, but not always. That's kind of one of those freedom. We don't necessarily have a time the entire group has to leave. There are some locations, of course, where if we're leaving a big city, we decide to ride as a group because that's better. It'll be different. But 99% of our days, we just have a recommended departure time. And then we have a tour leader that's out on the road with folks cycling usually or marking the road. And then we have our van driver who's loading up the luggage and then following in case anybody has any mechanical issues or is tired. But that van is also providing water and snacks if it's a van supported tour with vans. And we'll always recommend places for coffee, places for lunch. We don't tend to do lunches together in the middle of the day because we try and not have people feel like they need to get somewhere by a certain time.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
That's not always possible in some parts of the world where maybe there isn't a place for lunch on your own, then we're doing lunch together. If there's, 80 miles of nothing because you're in the beautiful outback of Chile, we are going to do lunch together and the van will be providing lunch, a picnic lunch. So it depends on the destination, but most of the time, especially in Europe, we don't have pre-planned lunches. And then you get to the hotel. Usually one of our tour leaders is there to help greet folks. Your luggage is either on our classic tours, most of our tours, they're in your room. That's kind of one of the little luxury things like to do. And in the afternoon, depending on where we're at, there may be a guided tour of the city. There might be a group cultural excursion, or we have written up things to sightsee on your own, depending on where we're at. And then, like I said, about 2/3 of the time we'll have dinner together and a briefing on the next day. And then you go eat, and the next day you repeat. The main thing you have to do is get up and ride your bike.
Yeah, I was going to say, all you have
sounds delightful.
Yeah, you don't have to do the hard work. You guys have done that for the travelers. But
right.
Do you have very many people that go as solo travelers that want to meet other like-minded cyclists?
We do. We definitely do. We also find that actually those solo travelers or even groups of friends, whether they're couples or just, two friends that decided to go, then meet other people. We have not a small number of groups that then they have so much fun on that tour that then the next year they're like, where are we going next year? And so they start to create these little posses of people who travel together. I do think that solo travelers, if people are comfortable also knowing that they may be biking on their own, we are a very good option for that because we do have that freedom and because we're not emphasizing a group ride during the day. If somebody is hoping to find somebody, then we always want to talk to them about the makeup of the group, because if it's a bunch of couples, I want to say 95% of our customers are really open and excited to meet other people, but it is a little bit of a dynamic. So group dynamics is a large part of what we're managing. And so that starts with people calling us at the office and saying, hey, can you tell me a little bit about who signed up for this trip? And we're always happy to talk about that.
So you have helped hundreds, probably thousands of people enjoy bike touring. What is it that you enjoy about traveling via bicycle? Like, do you have any highlights of what you enjoy the most?
My life has blended so much with the work and that it's hard to answer that sometimes. I think for me, it's hard to separate it. So what I may revert to in my answer may not be what other people would say. For me, it really is seeing other people experience a world at that pace. I also enjoy it. One of the benefits of how we navigate with our chalk arrows on our classic trips is actually that as a tour leader team, we rotate roles, and one of the days you get to go out and mark the route on your bike. That's what that person does. And so I actually think that as a company, we provide that treat to our tour leaders that every phase you actually are enjoying your own ride. So that's when I remember why it's so great to travel at our pace, even though we have a task to do, which is to put arrows down so people don't get lost. It does remind us why biking at that, biking is a beautiful pace for seeing the world. And I think that is inherently the gist of what we do. And it is also still what I love the most about it.
Yeah. And I would say the same thing. It's just, being able to bike whether it's 10 miles an hour or 15 or even 20, just you see things that you don't see going 65 miles an hour in your car. So I just love that
Right.
about traveling by
Right.
bike. Yeah.
Exactly. And you could stop when it's easier to stop. It doesn't feel as, I mean, sometimes you want to stop, a reason to stop.
Right. Yeah.
um, and so I like that. And yeah, I just think that the vehicle is such a special way to explore.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, how about do you have any like good memorable tours that you've been on, or maybe funny stories or people that you've met along the way? There's got to be a gazillion in your head, but do you have any highlights?
There are a gazillion. There are definitely a gazillion. I think that I think there's a couple of things. So and I'm sure this comes up, but I was just thinking and reminiscing on one of my first trips in a new trip in Portugal. Now it's not new; we've been running it for almost 10 years. But when I first helped design it, and when I was on one of the first tours, we had a brother and sister duo, and she was on an e-bike, and it was when e-bikes were just starting to be
Mm.
used on our trips about 8 years ago, and I think it was 8 years ago. And I heard that she loved the trip so much that the next few times she traveled with us, she had actually started biking more at home and ended up coming back on a trip or two without an e-bike because that trip had gotten her. It's kind of maybe the opposite of where most of the trend is going now, but it was something that just reminded me how, one, it was a reminder that this e-bike thing maybe isn't so scary and strange, that there's actually some really interesting things that can come out of people using e-bikes and exploring this new way of travel. But it was, and I feel like we've had a lot of people who maybe even in the last 25 years, they didn't think they could do this, so they joined a friend or they came on, and then they ended up becoming avid cyclists at home. And I think that's always something that's really special to hear, and we hear that quite a bit, actually. That's one story. Other stories are just, I don't know, people, even folks with families and young teenagers who never thought they could do a ride like that, or they thought it would be so boring, but then because they realized they were seeing so much more and exploring so much more, they ended up actually really enjoying it. When there was a guy who was on a trip with me, and he had his 13-year-old son, and some days he was just really enjoying learning from our tour leaders the techniques of bike riding. And then other days, it was like, let's go find the best strudel. And so how many strudels did he have by the end of the day? I don't know, probably like 7. But hey, it's still cultural immersion, right?
Hopefully he wrote like a little blog about, where to find the best.
I think this was before blogs. I'm thinking of this. This was good, like in the early 2000s that I'm remembering. Yeah, no, we have so many, one of the pleasures of us, or one of the goals in having people travel with our tour leaders, is actually that they're locals, and so they ask them questions. And we always remind our tour leaders that just explaining day-to-day life is that cultural interaction that is so helpful for people. Well, and that's one of the reasons we go abroad, is it just also supports people seeing new places and new things.
Yes, yeah. And I think everything on your website would be a new tour to me, like new place to go. So, okay, here's hypothetically, let's say I've got a wallet full of money, doesn't matter how much, and I want to go someplace. I want to see beautiful scenery and have fun on my bike and feel safe. Where would you send me?
Well, at least you said beautiful scenery. So you gave me one thing. Because sometimes people are like, what's the best tour? And it's like, well, it depends. Do you want great food? Do you want great history? Do you want great scenery?
Food I don't care about, but add history.
Oh, interesting.
History and
I would say
scenery.
The Camino de Santiago.
Oh.
The Camino de Santiago.
Is that Chile?
No, across northern Spain.
Oh.
So it's actually an old pilgrimage route that's been a pilgrimage route for hundreds, thousands of years, and it starts, well, the legend, of course, is that any pilgrimage starts when you leave your door.
Mm-hmm.
But the classic route goes basically from the border of Spain and France, and just above north of Pamplona or west of Pamplona, and then crosses all of northern Spain to Santiago de Compostela. And I say that because it really does combine history
Mm-hmm.
and great writing, and routes and places to pedal are always unique to you, but this one is more unique because it's got such a historical legacy of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who have traversed these villages and this route somehow since the beginning of the Camino. And it was originally a pilgrimage. I mean, it still is for many a religious pilgrimage, but the European Union, I think, estimates only 30% of the people who do it now do it for religious reasons.
Oh, okay.
It's more of a historical cultural route now. It's really become a historical cultural route. And I also am biased because I guided on it for 10 years. So I've done it many times.
So you would
it's one
know.
of the trips I know best.
Yeah, you would know the best. Yeah. And I love how you choose local people to be your tour guides, because not only are they speaking the language, I'm assuming they also can speak English at some level.
Yes.
But then
Absolutely.
they know all the secrets. Like, here's a great, go to this coffee shop instead of, the Starbucks that is here in Latin America or whatever. Nothing wrong with
Right.
Starbucks, but it's just like, seeing what really, like, what the local people also enjoy.
That's definitely the goal. That's definitely the goal with that. And then we have also designed these trips with locals or our local tour leaders, so that even if you have somebody, from in Spain, someone from Andalusia is maybe guiding up in the Camino de Santiago, they have all the knowledge that we have as a company of people who've gone through that route for years, and so that's helpful too. Yeah, it's so the other answer I would give you, though, for beautiful scenery and history would be the Dolomites of Italy, our cycling trip in the Dolomites.
Oh, yeah.
It is some of the most spectacular biking and views you'll ever see. And it's history, too. I mean, it was the front lines of a few world wars, so there's a lot of history there.
I have some friends that did that last year, and they still talk about it. Just in casual conversation. So you're right. You're right. Well, of course you're right, because you've, seen all of your tours. But so I'm on one of your.
I haven't seen all of them, actually. I have not been on all of them.
Oh, you haven't?
Be a full-time job.
Yeah, you're right.
I have not. No, we have almost 180 itineraries.
Oh my gosh.
That's part of sitting behind a desk now. I let other people go out.
Yeah. Well, and I'm looking at one of the pages on your website, and you just said over 180 tours, but it says 22 countries, which is mind-blowing in that. And then we've talked about, the classic tours, the bike and boat. We've talked about gravel, and then, of course, self-guided. So it's kind of, your website's a one-stop shop if you want to go on a bicycle tour of any kind to another country.
I hope so. We spent a lot of time on our website. We feel pretty strongly actually in putting all of our information on the website.
Yeah.
So you can find full day-by-day itineraries there for any trip that we run. And we also have a really strong travel planning section. If you go to the footer and you're just traveling in a country, we have tips on using phones, using trains, using extra hotel options when you're traveling, just because we aren't a full service travel agency, so we won't do all of the details for the pre and the post, but we want to provide as much information as we can as people try and plan, because we know that many people, when they take a big trip, they're not just coming on one of our trips. I mean, some people are.
Yeah. So the website is experienceplus.com. Is there anything else you want to tell us before we end this podcast interview?
Oh, I don't think there's anything that comes to mind. Thank you for leading me along, and hopefully I provided a picture of what we do and what we have available and why we love what we do.
Yes, for sure. And like the gravel is very intriguing to me, because a lot of our listeners, are recreational riders, but a lot of people are starting to gravel are gravel curious, I guess you could say, and are dabbling in gravel events. Especially I live in the Midwest of the United States, so we have more gravel roads than paved roads. So would be so interesting to seek out gravel in a completely different country.
Well, and it really lets you get off the beaten path even more. And there's some destinations that kind of like you just said in the Midwest, in some parts of the world, there are more gravel roads. The main roads are just the highway. And so therefore it lets us go and actually do a trip in that part of the world, and do an actual multi-day bike tour, when before we would have been trying to figure out if we need a shuttle across some busy stretches or something, and then we probably wouldn't have gone there. The Algarve in Portugal is an example of that particular destination, where it's a very well-known area and there's some great gravel riding. And so we've decided to expand into that. Was one of our first gravel trips that we added. And I actually did that one, and I'm not a huge gravel rider, and I really enjoyed the variety. I didn't realize how much I would enjoy, we do 60-70% maybe on gravel, but then the 20 or 30% off on pavement, because you're not always gravel point to point. And it really was a nice way for those who are gravel curious to jump in and explore that area.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And I love how with all of your tours, even, beyond self-guided, when you actually have tour guides, is that, like you said, you can go at your own pace. So if, I'm with somebody who likes to go a little bit quicker, then we can do that. Or if someone's with me, I have to stop all the time and take photographs, because I absolutely love, I want to remember everything. So I'm taking photos the whole time. Doesn't mean that I'm biking slow, but it's just that I'm going to take my time and I'm going to look for those chalk markings, and I'm still going to make it by dinner time.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. On our gravel trips, we do just use GPS routes, because the chalk is not as reliable on the different terrains.
Sure.
But the now with technology, that it's changed so much, and so we're able to provide the navigation that way.
I love it,
and that works out really well. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and hopefully everyone goes and checks out experienceplus.com. Of course, we'll put the link in our show notes, but man, thank you so much for your time and for getting me pumped up for more travel.
Absolutely. And let me know if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, listeners, that's it for this week. Email me at murphologypodcast@gmail.com if you have a topic or the name of a cyclist you find interesting. Support my podcast at patreon.com/murphology, and visit both my Facebook and Instagram pages for daily entertainment. I have more great episodes in the pipeline, so I hope you continue to be a Murphology podcast listener.